I just wanted to share with you my testimony of the visitation that I had when I dreamt that I went to heaven. And as I began to actually listen to other people's report on, out-of-body experiences or when they went to heaven, um, I found there were certain things that was just common. Some were different, but some was common. And I listened to the testimony of this young girl named Sarah Boyanga and Jesse Duplantis. And I listened to both their testimony, and some of them, Jesse Duplantis was his testimony was years ago, but as I listened to it, it just made my heart happy, but I wept because of the fact that so many people that don't believe in it. And, I'm not here to try to convince anybody, but I know of the experience that I had. And how this happened was I was actually in a dream one night. And as I was looking over a coffin, I saw myself in the coffin. And I saw all my brothers around me, and they were weeping. They were really crying because they were, you have a death. I'm the only sister, and I'm the oldest child. And, for them to see their sister laying in a grave, I can't even imagine how that would feel. But as I looked and I saw my brothers, my heart got heavy and I was grieving, but it was like I was hovering over them and they didn't see me, but I could see them and I saw everything that they were doing. And then all of a sudden, I just started floating upwards. I then entered this classroom setting, and it was many people in the classroom, and then there was this man that was like he was the head. I call him, he was an angel, is what I say. His countenance surprised me a little bit because he was like brown, like I was, but he had the most beautiful glow I'd ever seen. He was just beautiful, and he was stern, but yet he was soft-spoken, and his voice was just beautiful. And as he began to speak, he began to start teaching us all sorts of things, the things that we wanted to learn on earth or things that we always had questions on earth was being answered in this classroom. But the funny thing is I remembered everything about this dream except for this and another incident, but I did not remember anything that was asked, any questions that was asked. And I always laugh and say, God knew me because if he knows me too well, because had he told it to me or I remembered it, I would have probably blabbered it out and tell. But anyway, through that classroom setting, I remember just being fascinated. Every question that I had, I never had to one time ask it out loud or anybody else. It was just the thought. If you thought it, he would just answer it. This angel, he was just being, he didn't have the wings or anything, but he was huge and he was beautiful and his countenance was glowing and he was beautiful. But he would just answer your thoughts. And that was so fascinating to me. But I remember him also moving and saying that we had to move. We had to go from this setting because we had to go to worship. And I remember moving from that area, going to this huge hallway, and the hallway was gigantic. It was huge, and it was like a T, but part of it, we were walking, me and the people that were there in this classroom setting, and we were walking, but we were going towards the cross, the T. And as we were looking at the hallway, there were beings that were moving like light, like as fast as light. And they were small beings, some were larger beings. It was just all these different beings just moving. And I remember sticking my head out looking like, and asking myself, I wonder where everybody's going so quickly. And as soon as I said that, all of a sudden it was like this being, I call him a seraphim. He was short, small, but he had wings. And when I thought it and I said, where's everybody going in my mind? I never opened my mouth to physically say it. But when I thought it, he just answered. And when he answered, he just answered my thought. He said, don't you know that that we're preparing, that the children of God are coming home? And all I could think of and the only thing I remember physically saying was, oh, because it was like everything that was just stunning and amazing to me, I would just be in awe, and I would just say, ah, or oh, or something like that. And I remember moving from there, seeing all these beings, and everybody was like in a rush and hurry, and they were just moving like light, like as fast as light. And when we went to this area of worship, it was like almost like a sanctuary, and we went to worship, and everywhere was just beautiful. And when we went there to worship, I remember sitting down on the chair. But as I was sitting like in this area, almost like a pew, as I was sitting, I could actually feel like the movements, like things that was on earth. Like you could feel the trains and the cars, or it was just weird to me that you could feel that. But what I got when I got out of that dream was the fact that I didn't lose who I was. It wasn't like I just came into heaven and just became this super being and never remembered anything. But I realized that I was still able to identify that these were certain things on earth. And as I was sitting there in just amazement, and I would talk to the person who was next to me and just saying, I remember hearing that on earth, and I remember feeling this, and I was just expressing how I was excited at all these feelings and of things that I could remember being there. And when there was something that caught my attention. All of a sudden, it was like we were in this sanctuary, but you could hear prayers and praise coming up really, really loud in heaven. But the ones that you could hear that were really loud were only things that came from the heart. And there was one particular song. It was an older lady that was singing, and she wasn't melodious at all. She really didn't sound that well in the ears of man. But when I remember thinking and saying, wow, I remember that I remember that song. Remember I said two things that I didn't remember. One was the questions that was asked, and the other was the song that was sung that echoed. It was as though everything in heaven echoed, but this particular song echoed the loudest. It was like it bombarded heaven. And it was a little old lady singing, and she was just singing to the praises and glory of God, and wasn't anything special or a special song, but in heaven it was magnified. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I could remember that song, but it didn't really sound good. She didn't sound good. And then that's the angel that taught us and walked us over to the sanctuary. He said, everything and all songs and praises are like sweet smelling savor to the nose of God, or it's something like that, because I remember there was a scripture that said that. And then I began to picture the Father just as though he was smelling like a woman would just be just with scents, and with like a rose. You give me roses, and I love roses. I will take the last whiff of that if I could get my last breath of roses, because I love the smell of roses, and I will just savor that and let that sink into me, because I love roses. And that was how I pictured the Father. And it was just a picture in my mind. I didn't see him there at that time. And I just pictured him and just smelling. It's like he was enjoying it. It was like he was savoring it. His eyes were closed, his head was back, like it was something that just was passionate to him. And the only things that echoed in heaven were songs and there were prayers, but nothing that came up to heaven that I was exposed to. Nothing that came up to heaven, if it was not from the heart, it didn't even break the atmosphere. But anything that was pure and from the heart, a song that was sung from the heart, and worship that was sung from the heart, and prayers that were cried out from the heart, they were just magnified in heaven, just like echoes. And I remember right at that particular time, then we just began to worship, all the people. And there were other people that came in the room. And I remember there was one young lady that I remember from my high school. And when I saw her, I was so excited because I said she made it. And I was just so excited at the people that made it to heaven. And I'm sorry, but I get so emotional when I think of this. But I thank God, because when I think about this dream, it was a revelation to me. But going back to, we were all worshiping and praising. And as we began to worship and praise, then it was like, all of a sudden, it was like a presence came over us and we just shot up like giants. And that part I didn't really understand, but it was like the most exhilarating feeling, the most passionate feeling, the most, just, it was like a joy that fills you so. I don't even know how to explain, because there's nothing on earth that could explain the way you felt when you were in worship in heaven. It was so awesome and so beautiful. But anyway, and when I got out of the dream, I remember laying in my bed. I was next to my husband at the time. And I remember laying in my bed and I began to worship, laid my hands out. And at this time, like, let me go back a little bit. Before I had this dream, I was going through severe depression. I just had my last child and I was going through severe postpartum depression. And I remember when I got out of that dream, I was just lifting my hands and I began to praise God. And I could barely talk because I was crying so much. And my husband rolled over and he looked at me and said, "What's wrong, baby? What happened?" And I began to try to tell him about the dream. And he just looked, and he doesn't even remember up to this day. But he looked at me and he said, "Don't cast your pearls before swines." And he just rolled back over and went to sleep. And all of a sudden, all the tears, I sucked up the tears and I just stopped because it just shocked me what he said. But I pondered that for a long time. And when I kept that in my heart and I didn't express it or tell anybody about it for a while, for a couple of years. And then God led me to tell this young man, I was engaged to him, and God led me to tell him about it. And it's my oldest daughter's father. And we both were youth in our youth, youth in our youth group, etc., and all that stuff. And I didn't know at the time that when I shared that dream with him, that the dream wasn't for me. God let me know later the dream was for him, because 2 years later he died, he passed. And when I shared that dream with him, at first he was really, really, like, he didn't really believe a lot of it, because some of the things just didn't seem like how he thought heaven would be. But I just did what I had to do and shared it. And God showed me later on that he received it, because at first he didn't really receive it because it just didn't line up as he thought it should. And because certain things that I said, he just didn't agree, especially with the classroom setting and stuff. But I understand and I realize that heaven is so much bigger than we think. There's so many different facets to it. Some people tell of where they get to see their homes, and some people tell of they're walking in the garden on the streets of gold. And I never experienced or know anything about a setting, but the worship area was just awesome. And the one thing that I do remember, and people that worship in heaven, almost all of them across the board would speak of the worship experience and the praising. So I knew that lined up. But as I shared with this young man, and I told him years later, I realized that he actually followed and understood